Good afternoon, and welcome to the Rogue Theater. My name is Christopher Johnson. I'm an artistic associate here at the Rogue and the director of our production of Passage, and I've come here today to show you my homework. But before we get started, there are some folks that we... Oh, thank you. There are some folks that we would like to thank. First off, sponsoring my talk, Meg and Peter Havel, whose flowers I left just on stage. We'd also like to thank the Arizona Humanities Council for sponsoring this series of talks at the Rogue Theater. Most of you, when you walked in, were handed a wonderful background pre-show essay by our good friend Jerry James. Thank you, Jerry. And lastly, we want to give a huge thanks to the production sponsors for Passage who are here with us today, Max McCausland and John Smith. Thank you. All right, let's have an open talk. In 1909, at the age of 30, E.M. Forster, who would go on to write A Passage to India, published a short story called The Machine Stops. In it, he imagines a future in which humanity has taken to living underground, isolated in identical rooms like bees in a honeycomb. All bodily and spiritual needs are fulfilled by the machine. People's entire lives are spent in automated armchairs, and everything they require is delivered to them by a global network of pneumatic tubes that would make the executives at Amazon blush. Human communication is made via a kind of video conferencing tablet, what Forster called a cinema plate a century ago, but what we today might call an iPad, with which people conduct their only activity, the sharing of ideas and secondhand knowledge, so as to avoid the terror of direct experience. The Machine Stops is striking in its prescience, but you probably won't be surprised to hear that it doesn't end well. And this is a defining feature of Forster's work. Not to say unhappy endings, but an ever-present clarity about what he called weaknesses in the human equipment and the consequences of those weaknesses, consequences typically ignored until fatal. Now, I should add here that E.M. Forster wasn't really a sci-fi guy when it came to the majority of his output. He was a wealthy and educated Englishman, and his lane, like most wealthy and educated English writers of the period, was primarily class and social issues. But again, in all his writing, you get a distinct taste for the blood in the air surrounding human progress, a bitter taste at which we all recoil, but that we simply chalk up to the cost of making an omelet when it's time, yet again, for breakfast. Best known for his work as a novelist and literary critic, Edward Morgan Forster, or E.M. as we know him, was born on New Year's Day in 1879 to a wealthy London family. His architect father died of tuberculosis in 1880, just shy of Forster's second birthday, leaving him and his mother with money enough to provide for both the rest of their lives. At the age of 5, Forster and his mother moved to a house in Hertfordshire that would inspire his 1910 novel, Howard's End. A graduate of King's College, Cambridge, he celebrated the conclusion of his formal schooling with a lengthy trip to Italy, which you'll find reflected in his first novel, Where Angels Fear to Tread, written in 1905, as well as 1908's A Room with a View. It's not a fair description of either of their plots, but both of these novels, to varying degrees, humorously portray English nationals seeking something lacking in themselves abroad, only to find their own distaste for that which is foreign. This commentary on what you might call bad tourism would evolve in Forster's work. As he would write in his final novel, this pose of seeing India was only a form of ruling India. No sympathy lay behind it. Forster wrote 6 novels in all, one of which he didn't allow to be published until after his death. Written in 1913, but unavailable to the public until 1971, his novel Morris is a gentle and poetic love story about 2 English men who unite romantically across class lines and threat of imprisonment. Forster shared Morris with a few select friends, but dared not publish for fear of jail time. Unlike The Machine Stops, Morris has a happy ending, in which the guy gets the guy, making Forster vulnerable to criminal litigation for most of his lifetime. Some of the lucky few to have seen a copy of Morris while he was living were those in membership with him in the Bloomsbury set. The Bloomsbury set was a collective of writers connected through Cambridge and King's College London, and it included Virginia Woolf. Woolf said of Forster, "He says the simple things that clever people don't say. I find him the best of critics." Though loosely defined, the Bloomsbury set had 10 members and was a sort of intellectual aristocracy, promoting and encouraging one another's work and careers. Their membership greatly influenced the art and aesthetics of the time and contributed to more forward-thinking attitudes toward feminism, pacifism, and sexuality. The formation of the group occurred prior to any one of their individual rises to fame and was based in real friendship and affection. They denied any concrete affiliation, but claimed to be united under, quote, an abiding belief in the importance of the arts. As Dorothy Parker once said of them, they lived in squares, painted in circles, and loved in triangles. In 1912, and again in 1921, Forster traveled further east, informing his greatest success as a writer, the 1924 post-colonial novel, A Passage to India. But his research came not merely of touring the area, rather through direct social and governmental work he did living in the country as private secretary to the Maharaja of Duas. The British Raj, or the Crown Rule in India, had been ongoing since 1858 at this point, and Forster's novel lays the human toll bare. Harsh as this may sound, the writing in the novel is largely poetic and warm and welcoming. Early in the story, one character says to another, "Come, India's not as bad as all that. Other side of the earth, if you like, but we stick to the same old moon." Largely, it's a story of friendship between one Mr. Fielding from England and Dr. Aziz from India, and how the oppression of Dr. Aziz's people by Mr. Fielding's country prevents their ability to fully connect with one another, despite each man's enormous affection for the other. As Forster puts it late in the novel, while the 2 men take a friendly hike through the hills of Chandrapur, "If only they were all like that," each of them thought. Conflict arises courtesy of a third party, Miss Adela Quested. Miss Quested is the wife of an English official working for the Crown in India. She's a friend of Mr. Fielding's and a newer acquaintance to Dr. Aziz. The 3 make a date to take a tour together of a local curiosity, the Marabar Caves, a mountainous system of caverns and tunnels as immense and unknowable as the current rift between India and Britain. Briefly described in the novel, Forster tells us no one could romanticize the Marabar because it robbed infinity and eternity of their vastness, the only quality that accommodates them to mankind. The expedition gets off on the wrong foot right away. as Mr. Fielding runs into transportation trouble, and Dr. Aziz and Miss Quested are forced to go into the caves without him. Without Mr. Fielding to serve as icebreaker between the two, Dr. Aziz and Miss Quested quickly find themselves lost in the dark. Without guide or torch, both parties quickly become separated. Unaware that Dr. Aziz is no longer walking behind her in the cave, Miss Quested feels a violent tug on the pair of binoculars she carries in her hand, screams bloody murder, and flees. As Dr. Aziz emerges nearly a mile away from one part of the cave alone, Miss Quested is carried out of another part of the cave while describing her assault at his hands. Dr. Aziz is arrested, and a trial ensues, while Mr. Fielding serves as uncomfortable go-between, attempting to parse out what really happened in the dark between his friend that looks like him and his friend who doesn't. As Forster puts it, he was after the facts, though the herd had decided on emotion. Nothing enraged Anglo-India more than the lantern of reason if it is exhibited for one moment after its extinction is decreed. All over Chandrapur that day, the Europeans were putting aside their normal personalities and sinking themselves into their community. Pity, wrath, heroism filled them, but the power of putting two and two together was annihilated. It's a nearly century-old description of toxic nationalism that may as well have been written yesterday. An inherent cancer in the human condition that only continues to spread as we crowd each other in across the globe. Dr. Aziz is eventually vindicated in court when Miss Quested confesses she just scared herself in the dark. But the damage is already done. The oppression of Dr. Aziz's people by Mr. Fielding's countrymen is no longer something either of them can ignore, yawning like the mouth of the cave between them as they try in vain to simply just get back to enjoying each other's company over tea. As Forster puts it, all invitations must proceed from heaven, perhaps. Perhaps it is futile for men to initiate their own unity. They do but widen the gulfs between them by the attempt. So, very briefly, that's A Passage to India. Over the years following its publication, Forster's public presence became that of an increasingly prominent voice for liberal humanism, a philosophical and literary movement in which man and his capabilities are the central concern. His most enduring essay, a finely tuned manifesto of his belief titled Two Cheers for Democracy, arrived just on the cusp of World War II and Hitler's campaign for the purification of the race. And here to read a selection of it for us is Joseph McGrath.
Let us proceed to do our easy racial exercise. It is this. Can you give the name of your 8 great-grandparents? The betting is 8-1 that you cannot. The royal family could. Some aristocrats could. And so could a few yeomen who have lived undisturbed in a quiet corner of England for a couple of 100 years. But most of the people I know, and probably most of the people who read these words, will fail. We can often get 6 or 7, seldom the whole 8. And by the way, I only know one of mine. And the human mind is so dishonest and so snobby that we instinctively reject the 8th as not mattering, as playing no part in our biological makeup. As each of us looks back into his or her past, doors open into darkness. 2 doors at first, the father and the mother. Through each of these, 2 more. And then the 8 great-grandparents, the 16 great-greats, then 32 ancestors, 64, 128, until the researcher reels. Even if the stocks producing us interbred, and so reduced the total of our progenitors by using some of them up on us twice, even if they practiced the strict domestic economy of the Ptolemies, the total soon becomes enormous. On such a shady past as this, our common past, do we erect the ridiculous doctrine of racial purity. In the future, the situation will be slightly less ridiculous. Registers of marriage and birth will be kept more carefully, bastardy more cunningly detected, so that in a couple of 100 years, millions of people will belong to old families. This should be a great comfort to them. Citizens will be in a position to point to an Aryan ancestry if their government is Aryan, to a Cretanist ancestry if it is Cretan, and so on. And if they cannot point in the direction required, they will be sterilized. This should be a great discomfort to them. Nor will the sterilization help, for the mischief has already been done in our own day. The mess has been made. Miscegenation has already taken place. Whether there ever was such an entity as a pure race is debatable, but there certainly is not one in Europe today. The internationalisms of the Roman Empire and of the Middle Ages have seen to that. Consequently, there never can be a pure race in the future. Europe is mongrel forever, and so is America. A common language, a common religion, a common culture, all belong to the present. Evidence about them is available. They can be tested. But race belongs to the unknown and unknowable past. It depends on who went to bed with whom in the year 1400. And what historian will ever discover that? Community of race is an illusion. Yet belief in race is a growing psychological force, and we must reckon with it. People like to feel that they are all of a piece, and one of the ways of inducing that feeling is to tell them that they come of pure stock. That explains the ease with which dictators are putting their pseudoscience across. No doubt they are not cynical about it and take themselves in by what they say, but they have very cleverly hit upon a weak spot in the human equipment. The desire to feel 100%, no matter what the percentage is in. In India, I had friends who said they were descended from the sun and looked down on those who were descended from the moon. But they were not tense about it and seemed to forget about it between times. Nor did they make it a basis for political violence and cruelty. It takes the West to do that. We don't know what our ancestors were like or what our descendants will be like. We only know that we are all of us mongrels, dark-haired and light-haired, who must learn not to bite one another.
Thank you, Joe. In 1949, Forster declined a knighthood, but in 1953 accepted a position in the Order of the Companions of Honor, awarded by the British Commonwealth for major and enduring contributions to art, science, medicine, or government. He held 8 honorary degrees, 16 separate Nobel Prize nominations, and was inducted into the Order of Merit on his 90th birthday by Queen Elizabeth. He died a year later, in 1970. And so again, very briefly, that's E.M. Forster. 12 years passed, and in 1982, playwright Christopher Chen was born in San Francisco, California, to a Chinese father and an American mother. Chen was raised speaking Cantonese and then English. Writing plays was never on his mind growing up in the Bay Area, but he says he always knew he was going to be an artist. Some of his most celebrated work would carry forth a torch, similarly lit by E.M. Forster, shining light in the darkness surrounding humanity's best intentions. He took classes in acting, directing, and film as an undergrad at UC Berkeley, all while playing the cello in a symphony orchestra. Unsure which path forward to take out of this artistic identity crisis, he sought a more stable future in counseling and community services by finally settling on a degree in social welfare with a minor in theater. But through his work with an Asian American performance troupe who called themselves Theater Rice, Chen finally found an avenue through which his artistic instincts could cohere together into one unadulterated form of expression. Playwriting allowed me to combine literary sensibilities with musicality, with visual spectacle, he said in an interview in 2014. It allowed me to explore issues of social justice and develop my comedic impulses all at the same time. I could have it all. But apart from artistic hedonism, my impulse to combine has deeper roots. The fundamental worldview beneath all my work, the grand unified theory that I continue to explore as an artist and as a human being, is the interconnectedness of all things. My plays often hinge on the notion that the most intimate nuances of personal loss or insecurity ripple through society and are seated in our largest globalized social movements. There are fundamental links between social issues, spirituality, history, and psychology. It is the nature of these linkages I tackle in my work. In other words, the scope of the piece is itself the point. The world has scope. Issues have scope. All of this combined is what I mean when I say I like to create maximalist plays. When Christopher Chen wrote his first play, between under and postgrad, he also directed it and provided musical accompaniment on the cello. He went on to receive a master's degree in playwriting from San Francisco State University and has been at it ever since with increasing levels of success. An early example of his work I'd like to share with you, and that I think beautifully illustrates this idea of maximalist playwriting, is called The Late Wedding. Inspired by the work of author and journalist Italo Calvino, 2014's The Late Wedding is a fractured series of interconnected fables, including an anthropological tour of imagined tribal peoples and their unusual marital customs. It humorously challenges our desire as people to do better and our almost certain failure to overcome ourselves in the process. Please join me in welcoming my friends Carly Preston and Hunter Knapp for The Late Wedding. Thank you again for participating in my study of native marriages.
It is our great pleasure.
We're happy to talk.
We're happy to talk about anything.
Your tribe has been getting some attention.
Yes. That article.
That article.
You didn't like the article?
We feel it came from a place of prejudgment.
It is now clear he saw us as specimens, curiosities.
Instead of real people with real needs.
It is now clear he never took our beliefs seriously.
And that hurt.
Yes. That hurt us very much.
Well, I can assure you I don't judge. In my study, I want you to correct any misconception.
That sounds so incredibly wonderful.
That is why we agreed to this.
Great. Now, before getting to your marital beliefs, maybe we should address some of these misconceptions up front. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Of course.
Wonderful.
I think because of this Tribe of the Dead label, the main misconception is that your tribe members literally believe they're dead. Like dead for real? Like zombies? But it's really more a state of mind you're talking about, right?
No. We literally believe we're dead.
Oh. Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
Dead as in right now? Dead?
Dead. Right now. Yes.
So, can you explain this a little bit?
Of course. We are all dying, so we are dead.
The you of yesterday is dead.
And the you of just now is dead
As
too.
is future you.
Okay, future you might be, it might,
What? What?
don't get defensive.
I'm not getting defensive.
No, it's just that future you sounds confusing.
The point I was trying to make is that the past, present, and future are just words. There's no difference between will become, becoming, and is. And so the true world right now is the land of the dead. And we embrace this.
I see. I kind of see. Jumping ahead then, how does this living as the dead relate to your marital beliefs?
The problem with conventional marriage is attachment,
We attach to spouses, covet them.
leading us to often feel trapped.
And this is because of a bad attitudes toward death. We fear death. We fear death, and this is why we so desperately cling to things and people.
But to embrace this state of death is to dissolve these insecurities. So we have marriages of no attachment. Though we have single spouses, we are free to love anyone. We take on lovers, bear children anonymously, who are then raised by the tribe at large. Excuse me, who then start dying by the tribe at large. We are dead, so we have no limits.
Does jealousy become a problem in this way of life, of death?
No, not really. I mean, you would think so, but no.
If I can ask a blunt question, why bother getting married at all then? If you're beyond things like attachment and jealousy and even the two-parent unit.
This is an excellent question. And in truth, we are a tribe in flux. There is, in fact, growing debate on the necessity of marriage.
What kind of debate?
Well, don't.
What? There is a debate.
You're not seriously talking about...
Yes, I am talking about Steve and that book he read.
God, we're not talking about Steve again. Not now. Not now. No, Steve. The reason why we marry, which is still our tradition, is that on the whole, we love each other. We see love between two people as empowering. Power needed to walk among the dead.
Perhaps in the future we will not need marriage at all, but we are still weak, still caught in the insecurities of the living.
Do you have children?
I have had several.
And I am most likely a father. But by custom, I cannot know.
And how does that work exactly if you... Where's she going?
Who knows? Care for a child? Meet a lover?
If I can be frank, it seems like your tribe has some contradictions.
There will always be contradictions, because there is change. Things come and go, and that's what's really eternal. Coming and going doesn't go. Come, go, comes, goes, eternal. We go, and we go, and we come. We come.
Does it sadden you at all not to know your true children?
Well, in truth, there is a certain child with whom I have forged a particular bond with.
Yes?
But you cannot possess a child, even if the child is a part of you. In the end, you are you and you alone. And you will die alone. And as in when you really die for real. You will die alone. Even if friends and family are by your side, your death is a private thing. We're all separate people in the end. even if we wish this were not so.
Huh. Thank you, Carly and Hunter. So this, for me, is pure Christopher Chen, balancing humor and sorrow while excavating old ideas about love, death, and eternity in a fresh light. A light that reflects us back to ourselves in a way we can really engage with, laugh at, and ultimately reflect upon. I'd say the main journey in all of my plays, Chen says, is a digging process, where reality is presented and we see below that, and then we see below that. I always like to challenge myself to find ways of making that digging and uncovering process as visceral as possible. That's why I write plays in a bigger, spiritual sense, in order to uncover more about the world and challenge myself to see the world in a different way. So it's the process itself that I want to capture, because it's kind of a sacred process, this uncovering and digging process. But the digging and the rug pulling should be fun, too. It is meant to be more like a magician's act, where you go in knowing you'll be fooled, and hopefully you'll be delighted to be fooled, and hopefully enlightened, too. Now, despite the fact that Christopher Chen's body of work would continue to explore and defy various genres and their tropes, you can see clearly an increasing desire to dig through our failures to connect across cultures, similar to the work of E.M. Forster, that would eventually lead Chen to write the next play up at the Rogue, 2018's Passage. In his 2014 play, Caught, a museum exhibit about cultural appropriation in playwriting leads to the following exchange between the artist, whose work is on display, and the museum curator. And Cindy Meyer is going to join me to read The Artist for us. I'm sorry, it sounds like you're saying that no one should try and understand or engage or share stories from any other culture, because by the very virtue of their differences, they can never truly understand the other culture? Is that anywhere near your point of view?
No. No, not one bit, no.
No, of course not. Okay, so we can't engage? What if we need to help another country, if something must be done?
But why must anything be done?
Because sometimes there is a need, and we are in a position to help, like it or not.
It is not a matter of like or position. This is still a Fox News capitalist paradigm.
I'm sorry, I'm not even sure what we're talking about anymore. Capitalism?
It's not a matter of talking about anything. It's a matter of intention. What is this writer's intention? Altruism, yes. Broadening our perspective, yes. But also it is for himself. He is a storyteller by trade, so he needs new stories to sustain himself.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, why can't you help yourself and help others at the same time?
It's not a matter of can or can't. It is a matter of how is the story shaped given non-altruistic strains running through the intentions of telling it.
But of course we have our own self-interest in mind. It's impossible not to do that, right? I mean...
It's not a matter of course or impossible. This is still the language of capitalist assumptions. We assume we must operate from a goal of mutual benefit. Assume the highest ideal is benefiting yourself and others in tandem. But is this not, in essence, a paradigm of self-benefit?
So how do you suggest we engage with other cultures, with the rest of the world?
It's not a matter of engage or not engage. It is a matter of intentional awareness. People immerse themselves in other cultures because they are searching for something within themselves, taking parts of the culture that fills a need, and then leaving the rest behind. It is tasting a peach to better understand an apple, eating bacon, and claiming to know the lives of swines.
Thank you, Cindy Meyer. Infuriating and humbling all at once. Let's not kid ourselves, Chen seems to say in Caught. Our best intentions aren't helping anyone but ourselves. And the lesser of two evils is still, well, you get it. So what can we really do to help or to bring about lasting change in our interactions with those who have less privilege than we do, and without serving ourselves first? Chen fully excavates the question in his probing and impassioned play, Passage, a contemporary remix of E.M. Forster's A Passage to India. It's clear from the start that this is a completely different animal. Chen's take on the story is designed from the ground up to remind us that the imbalance of power examined in E.M. Forster's novel can be found anywhere and anytime. And he presents us in Passage, not with India and Britain, but instead with country X and country Y. Miss Quested is now Q, Dr. Aziz is now B, Mr. Fielding is F, and so on, what one reviewer glibly referred to as an alphabet soup of dramatic tension. His casting breakdown specifies neither race nor gender assignments for when you cast the play. He does these things, I believe, to neutralize any specific references or biases we might bring with us to the theater, to our perception of the story, and thereby allowing us greater access to the truth of the events that unfold. Power dynamics affect all human relationships, after all. Just as a little example thought experiment, let's all in this room, all of you here today, just take a moment to empathize with your fellow theatergoers who don't have season tickets to the Road, and the experience they have of walking in this room before a show starts only to see a line of golden hoods has already reserved the first 3 rows. This blurring of lines and sides in Chen's play is what inspired us to choose this particular audience configuration, what Joe calls a transverse staging for our production of Passage. You'll have noticed that you are split right down the middle, north and south, with an open passage of space between you, just like the people of country X and country Y. The music you'll hear in the play is similarly imagined. We'll have a cellist, a nod to Chen's early days in the symphony, and a percussionist. Rather than situating them together on stage like we usually do, the musicians in this production will be performing from either end of the playing area, east and west, serving more of a conversation than an underscoring, both harmonious and discordant, like friends struggling to stay connected as conflict emerges between them. Now, Chen's play unfolds in a very similar manner to Forster's novel, but with a somewhat postmodern playfulness. Some of the characters from the novel are given more prominent roles, while others are combined or omitted entirely. Chen gets to the question of, to paraphrase, why can't we be friends, out of the box almost right away. He replaces the pair of binoculars that Miss Quested feels tugged away from her in the caves with a handgun that inexplicably goes off in the dark. There's a trial and a vindication and damage done. Chen utilizes the symbol of the caves a bit more directly than Forster, as a metaphor for the darkness in our minds before a thought or impulse is formed, as a place within each of us fertile with both fear and hope, and many confusing tunnels down which to easily and unknowingly get turned in the wrong direction. Likewise, if you're looking for a direct adaptation of a passage to India in the scenes you'll encounter in Passage, you're going to lose the path. But to give you an idea of the difference in tone and delivery between these two works, and without spoiling anything, I'd like to present you with a brief selection from the novel, followed by its counterpart in Chen's play. Now, from chapter 3 of Forster's Passage to India, we read, "Going to hang up her cloak, Mrs. Moore found that the tip of the peg was occupied by a small wasp. She had known this wasp or his relatives by day. They were not as English wasps, but had long yellow legs which hung down behind when they flew. Perhaps he mistook the peg for a branch. No Indian animal has any sense of an interior. Bats, rats, birds, insects will as soon nest inside a house as out. It is to them a normal growth of the eternal jungle, which alternately produces houses, trees, houses, trees. There he clung, asleep, while jackals in the plain bayed their desires and mingled with the percussion of drums. Pretty dear, said Mrs. Moore to the wasp. He did not wake, but her voice floated out to swell the night's uneasiness." Simple enough, right? Certainly not much dialogue or dramatic action. Something most adapters, for lack of a better term here, would probably cut out entirely. But here's how the same scene unfolds in Christopher Chen's Passage, where the character of Mrs. Moore and Mr. Fielding have been combined into the character of F.
Don't be scared. We're still in my living room. Believe it or not, I know this looks like a human, like H's assistant or the head doctor, but this is actually a mosquito. This is going to sound strange, but I've been seeing things differently here. On my return to Country X, things take on different forms and
I can talk too.
you can.
Yes.
And why talk to me?
Why talk to me?
Why not?
People normally want to kill me. You didn't. You saw me resting my weary wings on a coat hook and said, "Pretty thing."
I thought you mistook the coat hook for a tree branch.
I mistook nothing. I found a place to rest, and so I did. Am I only allowed to rest on what you call a tree?
Of course not.
This is not your house. The jungle doesn't understand walls.
Mosquito,
Yes?
I feel bad. In the temple the other day, I made mean comments about another person.
The head doctor.
Yes,
But what if he's mean to others?
but I don't want to be a person who says mean things about other people.
But it opened a door of friendship.
There must be another way.
Or is kindness a luxury?
Are you just being contrarian?
No.
Mosquito,
Yes.
have I come to the right place for this last leg of my journey?
Shall I give a cryptic answer or let the question sit?
Thank you, Joe and Hunter. One of the final aspects of Passage that I think would be helpful to your understanding of the play is the influence of a school of dramatic exercises known as theater of the oppressed. Theater of the oppressed was developed in the 1960s by a Brazilian artist and activist named Augusto Boal. Working out of the Arena stage in Sao Paulo, his aim was to provide a new theatrical form with which oppressed peoples could find community and integrity through honest and optimistic dramatic exercises between actors and audience members. The ultimate goal, to rehearse for the revolution. Now, he goes about this by eliminating the traditional Western barriers between actor and audience, and finally, reversing their roles. In the introduction to an essay on the subject, Boll says, "In the beginning, the theater was the dithyrambic song, free people singing in the open air, the carnival, the feast. Later, the ruling classes took possession of the theater and built their dividing walls. First, they divided the people, separating actors from spectators, people who act and people who watch. The party is over. Secondly, among the actors, they separated the protagonists from the mass. The coercive indoctrination began." Later in the essay, he says, "Bourgeois theater is the finished theater. The bourgeoisie already knows what their world is like, their world, and is able to present images of this complete, finished world. The oppressed classes do not know yet what their world will be like. Consequently, their theater will be the rehearsal, not the finished spectacle." Now, Boll makes this work by enlisting the audience in the direction of the events on stage. So, a social problem or inequity is presented by the actors, and suggestions are taken from those in attendance on how things might be resolved. The actors then continue the story by improvising those suggestions to their natural ends. As Boll says, one must keep in mind the main objective, to change the people. Spectators, passive beings in the theatrical phenomenon, into subjects, into actors, transformers of the dramatic action. The practice of these theatrical forms creates an uneasy sense of incompleteness that seeks fulfillment through real action. Why make a revolution in reality if we have already made it in the theater? In Christopher Chen's passage, some of Boll's methods are implemented throughout as a means of reminding the audience at key moments that this is an ongoing story, one that directly involves and implicates each and every one of us. In the opening scene of the play, the actors come out and simply introduce themselves, one by one, as just that, actors, people, just like you and me, with real names and differing backgrounds that led each of them to this very room. Passage doesn't take the exercise quite so far as improvising social solutions from audience suggestions, but we do offer something at the Rogue called a post-show discussion, so we've got you somewhat covered. Passage ends, not unlike A Passage to India, with two souls from different sides of the world desiring friendship but unable to achieve it on such unequal footing as colonial oppression has left them, no matter the affection and respect each has for the other. But where Forster's A Passage to India was a window through which to observe, Christopher Chen's passage, with some help from Augusto Boll's Theater of the Oppressed, concludes more like the opening of a door through which an invitation is made to the audience to encounter their own role in the events that have unfolded and in whatever events may yet unfold outside the safety and remove of the theater space. I won't spoil the particulars, but will instead note that Chen and Forster seem again to be of like mind here, that simply applying guilt or denial to one's own power or privilege doesn't accomplish anything but self-paralysis. Something more useful is wanted. In his essay, 2 Cheers for Democracy, Forster writes, "One must be fond of people and trust them if one is not to make a mess of life, and it is therefore essential that they should not let one down. They often do, the moral of which is that I must myself be as reliable as possible. And this I try to be. It is matter for the heart, which signs no documents." In other words, reliability is impossible unless there is natural warmth, Most of us possess this warmth, though we often have bad luck and get chilled. Most of us want to keep faith, and one can, at all events, show one's own little light here, one's own poor little trembling flame, with the knowledge that it is not the only light shining in the darkness, and not the only one which the darkness does not comprehend. The memory of birth and the expectation of death always lurk within the human being, making him separate from his fellows and consequently capable of intercourse with them. Naked I came into the world, naked I shall go out of it too, and a very good thing, for it reminds me that I am naked under my shirt, whatever its color. My hope for audiences attending our production of Passage is to have provided them with a feeling of unfinished business, not through any lack of clear or incomplete storytelling, but instead with the empowerment to continue the story themselves when they leave the theater, to provide safe passage, so to speak, on the road to revolution. Thank you for your time today.